We've got a square screen put together. Let's now try to create a reusable component that's going to show essentially just that right there. We can then show it 3 times inside of our square screen, and we'll pass in a prop of either red, green, or blue to customize the text that shows up inside that component. So back inside my editor, I'll find my source components directory. Inside there, I'll make a new file, and I'm going to call this like, how about color adjuster, or how about color counter.js. I'm going to call it color counter because we're essentially building a small counter component of sorts right here. So then inside this component, we'll put down some boilerplate again. Rather than rewriting it all from scratch, I'll just go back over to my square screen. I'm going to copy everything inside of here and then paste it inside of color counter. Again, just to save us ourselves a little bit of time. I'll then update some variables inside of color counter. So I'll update the component name to color counter. I'll update the export default to color counter. And then we can start putting together some actual implementation. So I'm going to also import the button element from React Native. So I've now got view, text, style sheet, and button. So now we can put something together here. I'm going to first begin by deleting that text element. I'll replace it with a view. Inside there, I'll place text again. And for right now, I'm just going to hard code in red. So I'm going to assume that we're just building this first one. We'll then come back in and customize the text using some props after we get everything working. So I'll give this a text of red. I'll then show a button element that has a title of increase red. I'll duplicate that down, and the second one I'll give increase, not increase, but decrease red. There we go. Okay, so this looks like a good first shot. Let's now show this inside of our square screen 3 separate times, and then we'll start to customize it using props. So I'll save this file, flip back over to square screen. At the top, I will import color counter from up1 directory. I'll go into components and then get the color counter file. Then inside of here, rather than showing a text element, I'll replace it with a view. And inside of view, I'll place color counter 3 times. Once again, I'm using a self-closing tag here because I don't expect to have to pass in anything between an opening and closing tag. There are reasons that we would want to do that, and we'll take a look at why we would do that later on inside the course. Okay, so now it's time to test this out. I'll save it, flip back over, I'll go to Square Demo, and yep, that's looking pretty good. Well, maybe it doesn't look great, but it's definitely essentially what we want. And on Android, we've got something very similar. So now we need to start to customize the text inside of color counter by using the prop system. So we're probably going to want to pass in a prop to the first color counter to indicate that it should show red, and then blue and green. So I'm going to make up a prop name. I think a reasonable prop name would be like color. So that will be a string of red. And I'm going to make it capitalized here because in all my mockups over here, we're always showing a capitalized string of red. I could pass in lowercase red instead, but then I'd just have to upcase it or handle capitalization inside my component, which is just a little bit annoying. I'll then repeat that process for the other 2 as well. I'll change the second one to be blue, and then the last one to green. All right, so we can now save this file. We can go back over to our color counter where we're going to make use of this new prop that we are passing in. So back inside of color counter, we can receive that props object. Remember, we usually make use of destructuring, and we only pull out the property we actually care about. So rather than receiving the entire props object, I'm going to instead place a set of curly braces inside of here and then list out color, because once again, that's the only property I really care about using. We can now make use of that color variable everywhere inside of here that we currently have written out red. So rather than red right here, I'll replace it with red curly braces, or I suppose just curly braces. Sorry, on my editor they are red, but they're not necessarily red on your editor. And we'll print out the color variable inside there. And now for the title right here, well, this is going to be a little bit more complicated. Remember, I told you a little bit ago that when we place a string inside of a JSX element, we don't need to use those curly braces. However, in this case, we want to use a little bit of string interpolation, or string templating, to essentially inject this color variable into this string. If we're using string interpolation, then we do have to make use of those curly braces. So I'm going to wrap that string right there with curly braces. I'm then going to replace the double quotes with backtick characters. Again, these are backtick characters, not a single quote. Make sure you are using backticks as well. I can then delete red and replace it with $ curly braces, and I'll refer to color inside there. And now we can repeat that same process with the second title as well. So I'll just delete the entire string this time, place my curly braces, place the backticks. I'll do decrease, $ curly braces, color. All right, so we're ready for another test. So I'll save this, flip back over, and now I see red, increase red, decrease red, blue, 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 and green as well. Very good. All right, so this is looking good. So now the last thing we have to do is start to add in some state variables and modify them from this button element. But there's kind of a really big question that we need to answer first. Where are we going to place these state variables? Should we create the state variables inside of our color counter component, because this is what is modifying them? Or should we create the state variables inside of our square screen, because this is what's going to actually use them? So that's actually an interesting question. Let's take a quick pause right here. We'll come back in the next video and we'll get some guidance on where we should create our state variables.